Have you ever felt that peculiar sensation? Someone's eyes lingering on you just a moment too long after a conversation ends? That subtle shift in energy when a particular person enters the room. These moments aren't coincidences, they're glimpses into the unconscious mind's powerful undercurrents. The truth about obsession is that it rarely announces itself. Like an underwater stream, it moves beneath the surface, invisible yet shaping everything above. What we call obsession is often what Carl Jung would recognize as psychological projection, a phenomenon where one person unconsciously attributes their own unacknowledged thoughts, feelings, and desires onto another. Think about that person, who always seems to find reasons to contact you, the colleague who somehow appears wherever you are, the friend who remembers details about your life that even you've forgotten. What appears as casual interest might be the tip of something deeper. Jung understood that we're drawn to people who mirror parts of ourselves we haven't yet recognized, our shadow content. When someone becomes fixated on you, they're often seeing something in you that represents their own unfulfilled potential or unacknowledged desires. Let's consider John, a real case from Jung's practice. He couldn't understand why he kept thinking about a woman from his community who barely acknowledged his existence. In their sessions, Jung helped him realize that he wasn't obsessed with her specifically. She represented qualities he had suppressed in himself: spontaneity, creative expression, emotional freedom. His fixation was his psyche's attempt to reclaim these lost parts. What happens when someone projects their shadow onto you? You might notice their behavior changing in subtle ways. First, there's the intensity of their attention, not just listening, but absorbing your words as if they're sustenance. Their eyes track your movements. They remember conversations verbatim weeks later. Second, notice the mirroring. They begin adopting your mannerisms, your phrases, perhaps even your interests. This isn't conscious imitation. It's the unconscious attempting to merge with what it desires. Third, watch for emotional inconsistency. Obsession creates emotional volatility. They might seem unnaturally happy in your presence one moment, then inexplicably distant the next. These aren't mood swings, they're the manifestation of internal conflict. Fourth, pay attention to how they speak about you to others. People who are psychologically fixated often idealize their subject. If friends mention that someone describes you in ways that seem exaggerated or overly positive, this could be projection at work. Fifth, notice the coincidental appearances. Jung recognized that the unconscious mind influences our decisions in ways we don't recognize. Someone drawn to you might create situations to be near you while genuinely believing these encounters are chance. Why does understanding this matter? Because recognizing projection isn't about feeding ego or creating distance. It's about compassion. The person fixated on you is engaged in an unconscious process of self-discovery. What they see in you exists within them, calling for integration. This doesn't mean accepting uncomfortable or boundary-crossing behavior. Jung emphasized the importance of individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole, which requires clear boundaries. You can acknowledge someone's projections without becoming responsible for their psychological journey. Ask yourself, when you sense someone's hidden attention, what emotion arises in you? Is there recognition, discomfort, curiosity? Your own reaction offers insight into what this dynamic might be activating within your own unconscious. Remember that we all project. We all seek ourselves in others. The difference is awareness. By understanding these dynamics, you become more conscious of the invisible psychological currents flowing between people, what Jung called the collective unconscious that connects us all. The next time you sense someone's hidden obsession, rather than immediately pulling away, pause. Consider what aspect of themselves they might be seeing in you. This awareness doesn't create obligation, but it does offer understanding, and understanding is the first step toward genuine human connection. When someone becomes quietly obsessed with you, what you're witnessing is not just attraction. It's the beginning of what Jung would call a shadow dance. This intricate psychological choreography reveals itself through patterns that most people miss, but once recognized, cannot be unseen. The shadow, in Jungian psychology, contains all the parts of ourselves we've disowned, qualities deemed unacceptable, shameful, or frightening. But the shadow doesn't disappear simply because we've pushed it away. Instead, it seeks expression through projection, often attaching itself to someone who embodies what we've denied in ourselves. Consider how this manifests in everyday interactions. Have you noticed how someone's behavior toward you seems disproportionate, to your actual relationship, perhaps a casual acquaintance who reacts with unexpected intensity to your accomplishments, either with excessive praise or thinly veiled criticism. This emotional amplification is a shadow marker, a sign that you've become a screen for their projections. Let's explore the deeper patterns of this fixation as it develops. The first stage is idealization. When someone's shadow has found you as its target, they begin to see you not as you are, but as a solution to their incompleteness. Emma, a marketing executive from Boston, described her experience. My co-worker would analyze everything I said in meetings, telling others I was brilliant when I'd made ordinary comments. It felt strange, like he was seeing someone else when he looked at me. What Emma experienced was her colleague's Anima projection, Jung's term for a man's unconscious feminine aspect seeking recognition. Her colleague wasn't seeing Emma. He was seeing the feminine wisdom he'd disowned within himself. The second stage reveals itself through what Jung called synchronistic events, meaningful coincidences that defy logical explanation. The person appears in places you frequent. They discover shared interests that seem statistically improbable. A client named William noted, "She suddenly took up hiking after I mentioned it once. Then she joined the same obscure book club. Eventually, she even applied for a position at my workplace. Each time she acted surprised at the coincidence. These aren't calculated stalking behaviors. That's something different entirely." What William experienced was someone whose unconscious was literally guiding their life choices toward him, while their conscious mind created rational explanations for these decisions. The third stage manifests as emotional mirroring with unusual precision. Someone obsessed at the unconscious level will reflect your emotional states with uncanny accuracy, but with greater intensity. If you're slightly annoyed, they become angry. If you're pleased, they're ecstatic. This mirroring comes from what Jung called participation mystique, a primitive psychological state where boundaries between self and other blur. David, a teacher from Chicago, recalled, "During a faculty meeting, I felt mildly frustrated, but kept it professional. Later, my colleague exploded about the same issue, saying exactly what I'd been thinking, almost verbatim, but with rage I hadn't expressed. It was like watching my internal thoughts performed on stage." The fourth stage involves symbolic gifts, or communications loaded with personal meaning that seems impossible for them to know. Someone caught in an unconscious fixation develops an almost telepathic sensitivity to your inner world. They might reference a dream you've had without your having shared it, or give you an object that speaks to a private longing. "He gave me a vintage copy of East of Eden," remembered Tanya from Seattle. "It was strange because I'd never told him it was the book that changed my life as a teenager. When I asked how he knew, he couldn't explain, just said he had a feeling I would connect with it." The fifth and most revealing stage is paradoxical behavior, dramatic swings between seeking closeness and creating distance. Jung recognized that unconscious obsession creates internal conflict. The ego feels threatened by the power of this attraction and fights against it, creating a push-pull dynamic that can feel bewildering to experience. One day, she would share deeply personal stories, texting constantly, said Robert from Austin. So the next day she'd be cold, claiming she needed space, only to return with even greater intensity afterward. This cycle repeated for months. What makes these patterns significant isn't their individual occurrence, but their constellation. When multiple signs appear together, you're likely witnessing someone's unconscious projection rather than conscious manipulation. Why does this matter? Because understanding the nature of unconscious obsession changes how we respond to it. Conventional advice might suggest avoidance or confrontation. Jung would recommend something different: compassionate awareness. The person projecting their shadow onto you is suffering, caught in an unconscious process they neither understand nor control. Their fixation isn't really about you. It's about their own journey toward wholeness. What they're drawn to in you exists within them, waiting to be recognized and integrated. This doesn't mean you bear responsibility for their psychological development. Boundaries remain essential, but it does offer a perspective beyond judgment or fear. The shadow dance is ultimately a misguided attempt at healing. When you recognize these patterns, you gain the power of conscious choice. Rather than reacting from instinct, either pulling away in discomfort or being drawn into the intensity, you can respond with awareness. This might mean gentle boundary setting that acknowledges the projection without accepting it as your identity. You might say, "I notice you seem to see qualities in me that feel larger than who I actually am." I wonder if these are aspects of yourself you haven't fully recognized yet. Such a response isn't therapy. It's truth-telling that honors both their experience and reality. It creates space for genuine connection rather than unconscious entanglement. The shadow dance, when recognized, offers profound insight into human nature. We are all seeking wholeness, sometimes through the indirect route of projection. By understanding this process, we develop compassion not just for others, but for our own unconscious patterns of attachment and idealization. As Jung himself noted, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The person obsessed with you is holding up a mirror, not to who you are, but to the universal human journey towards psychological integration and wholeness. When someone's fixation on you moves beyond casual interest into the realm of unconscious obsession, you stand at a crossroads of archetypal significance. This moment represents what Jung called a confrontation with the unconscious, not just for them, but potentially for you as well. How you navigate this dynamic can either perpetuate unconscious patterns or catalyze profound psychological growth for both parties. The archetypal dimension of obsession reveals itself through recurring symbolic patterns that transcend individual psychology. These patterns appear throughout human history, in mythology, literature, and cultural narratives, because they represent fundamental psychological processes. Understanding these archetypal underpinnings provides the deepest insight into what's really happening beneath the surface of obsession. Let's explore the 5 primary archetypes that manifest in cases of unconscious fixation and how recognition of these patterns creates possibilities for transformation. The first and perhaps most powerful is the Animus complex, Jung's terms for the contrasexual aspects of our psyche. For men, the Anima represents their inner, feminine qualities. For women, the Animus embodies their masculine aspects. When someone projects these elements onto you, their obsession takes on a numinous, almost spiritual quality. Mark, a university professor from Pennsylvania, shared, "A student would wait after every lecture to continue our discussions. Her questions were thoughtful, but there was an intensity that felt disproportionate. Eventually, she admitted that our conversations were the only times she felt intellectually alive. She'd been raised to suppress her analytical side as unfeminine, and our discussions had awakened her dormant animus." What made this situation archetypal rather than merely personal was how it reflected the universal human struggle to integrate disowned aspects of gender identity. Mark represented not just himself, but the archetypal wise man or Senex figure, and he, embodiment of the qualities his student had been culturally conditioned to reject in herself. The transformation began when Mark recognized this projection and responded not with dismissal, but with redirection. I suggested she join our philosophy club, where she could engage with these ideas in a group setting rather than just with me. This shifted our dynamic from personal fixation to community engagement. Within months, she no longer needed me specifically. As the carrier of her projection, she had begun integrating those qualities herself. The second archetypal pattern emerges through the shadow, those qualities we've rejected from conscious awareness that then appear magnified in others. Shadow. Obsession manifests as a peculiar combination of fascination and aversion. The person seems simultaneously drawn to you and triggered by you, often criticizing in you the very qualities they unconsciously express themselves. Rachel, a creative director from Seattle, recalled, "A colleague would scrutinize my work relentlessly, finding flaws others didn't see, yet he constantly sought my approval. In meetings, he'd oscillate between challenging everything I said and then later incorporating my exact ideas into his presentations. The contradiction was striking, as if he both resented and coveted something about me." The archetypal nature of this dynamic connects to the universal experience of encountering our disowned qualities in others. Rachel represented her colleague's creative potential, parts of himself he had judged as inadequate or inappropriate. His fixation reflected not personal desire, but the psyche's drive toward wholeness. Transformation occurred when Rachel recognized the pattern. Instead of taking his criticism personally, I began responding with genuine curiosity about his creative perspective. I'd ask, "How would you approach this differently?" This simple shift changed everything. Initially uncomfortable, he eventually began sharing original ideas rather than critiquing mine. What looked like obsession was actually his creativity seeking expression through the path of least resistance, projection. rather than integration. The third, archetypal manifestation, appears through the persona and its counterpart, the true self. Jung described the persona as our social mask, the face we present to the world. When someone becomes obsessed with you because you embody authentic self-expression they cannot access, their fixation serves as a bridge between their persona and true self. James, a musician from Nashville, described, "A fan would attend every local show, always positioning himself directly in my sightline. After performances, he'd approach with questions about my creative process, my background, my influences, but never about the technical aspects of music, though he was a musician himself. Eventually, he confessed that watching me perform gave him permission to imagine himself expressing emotion through music, something his strict upbringing had discouraged. The archetypal dimension of this interaction connects to humanity's universal struggle between social conformity and authentic self-expression. James represented not just himself, but the archetypal creator, embodying the courage to express vulnerability through art that his fan had suppressed. The transformation emerged gradually. I suggested we collaborate on a small project. Nothing major, just enough to create a container for him to experiment with emotional expression in a supported environment. The obsessive quality of his attention dissolved as he began accessing those qualities in himself, rather than just witnessing them in me. The fourth archetypal pattern involves the wounded healer, Jung's recognition that our psychological injuries become the source of our healing capacities, both for ourselves and others. When someone projects this archetype onto you, their obsession often manifests as a belief that you alone can understand or heal their pain. Elena, a yoga instructor from California, shared, "A student would linger after class, sharing increasingly personal struggles. She attributed profound healing experiences to my classes, describing physical and emotional responses that seemed disproportionate to the actual practices. She began rearranging her schedule to attend every class I taught, eventually asking for private sessions where she revealed childhood traumas." The archetypal nature of this dynamic connects to humanity's universal experience of wounding and the search for healing. Elena had become a vessel for the wounded healer archetype, representing not just herself, but the principle of transformation through suffering that resonated with her students' unconscious needs. The path toward healthy resolution appeared when Elena recognized this projection. I gently suggested that while yoga can support healing, addressing trauma requires appropriate professional support. I helped her connect with a trauma-informed therapist while maintaining our teacher-student relationship. Initially disappointed, she eventually thanked me for not accepting a role I wasn't qualified to fulfill. The obsession transformed into appropriate appreciation as she found healing through proper channels. The fifth and perhaps most profound archetypal pattern emerges through the self, Jung's term for the archetype of wholeness and the organizing center of the psyche. When someone projects the self onto you, their obsession takes on a distinctly spiritual quality. They perceive you as having achieved an integration they unconsciously seek, investing you with almost divine significance. William, a community organizer from Minnesota, recalled, "A younger colleague began treating everything I said as profound wisdom. He'd quote my casual comments back to me months later, finding layers of meaning I hadn't intended. He mimicked my leadership style, adopted my mannerisms, even began dressing similarly. When faced with decisions, he'd explicitly ask himself, 'What would William do?' It was flattering but uncomfortable. I recognized I was carrying his projected potential." The archetypal dimension of this interaction connects to humanity's universal drive towards psychological integration and wholeness. William had become a vessel for the self-archetype, representing not his limited personal identity, but the principle of psychological completion his colleague sought unconsciously within himself. Transformation became possible when William addressed the projection directly. I shared my own uncertainties and growth edges, deliberately revealing areas where I was still developing. I introduced him to other leaders with different styles and strengths. Most importantly, I began asking for his perspective rather than always offering mine. These interventions gradually redistributed the projected energy, allowing him to recognize his own wisdom rather than locating it all in me. These archetypal patterns rarely appear in isolation. Most cases of unconscious obsession involve combinations of these fundamental psychological energies seeking expression and integration. What makes them archetypal rather than merely personal is their connection to universal human experiences, the struggle to become whole, to integrate disowned aspects of ourselves, to heal from wounding, and to express authenticity. The transformative potential in these situations emerges through recognition. When you can identify which archetypal energies someone is projecting onto you, you gain the capacity to respond to the deeper process, rather than just the surface behaviors. This shift from personal reaction to archetypal understanding creates a space for genuine psychological development. Consider these practical approaches to working with archetypal projections. For Animus projections, direct the person toward other representatives of these energies in their life, mentors, friends, or community members who embody similar qualities. This helps distribute the projection rather than concentrating it on you alone. For shadow projections, create opportunities for the person to recognize and reclaim these disowned qualities. Simple questions like, "I notice you seem particularly sensitive to this quality in me. Is that something you value in yourself?" can initiate recognition. For persona true self-projections, model the integration of authenticity and social functioning. Share your own journey towards self-expression, including the challenges and failures along the way, to demystify the process they've idealized in you. For wounded healer projections, maintain appropriate boundaries while acknowledging the reality of suffering and the possibility of transformation. Direct them toward proper therapeutic resources while validating their capacity for healing. For self-projections, deliberately reveal your humanity, your uncertainties, limitations, and growth edges. Actively seek their wisdom rather than always, positioning yourself as the knower, creating balance in the relationship. The greatest barrier to transformation in these dynamics is shame. When someone recognizes their projection, they often experience embarrassment about their unconscious. Attachment. Creating a shame-free environment allows the energy of projection to transform into genuine connection. Thomas, a spiritual counselor from New Mexico, shared his approach. "When I sense someone projecting archetypal content onto me, I normalize the experience. I might say, it's fascinating how the psyche works. We often recognize in others what we're in the process of developing in ourselves. I've experienced this too." This framing honors the wisdom of the unconscious process while gently redirecting it toward conscious integration. Jung emphasized that projection is not a pathology, but a natural psychological mechanism for growth. The unconscious first recognizes itself in others before it can be integrated internally. By understanding obsession through this archetypal lens, we transform what might feel threatening or uncomfortable into an opportunity for mutual development. The ultimate resolution of unconscious obsession comes not through rejection or absorption of the projection, but through what Jung called conscious realization. This occurs when both parties recognize the archetypal energies at play and intentionally participate in redirecting them toward their proper purpose, the individuation and wholeness of each person. As Jung himself wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." When someone's unconscious fixates on you, you stand at the threshold of such transformation. By responding with archetypal awareness rather than personal reaction, you participate in the ancient and ongoing human journey towards psychological integration, the process by which we each become more fully ourselves. In this recognition lies the profound wisdom of Jung's approach. What appears as interpersonal complication reveals itself as intrapersonal opportunity. The person obsessed with you is not your psychological responsibility, but their projection offers a mirror through which both of you might glimpse deeper dimensions of human experience, and in that glimpse, find pathways toward wholeness that neither could discover alone.